Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Boa tarde. Uh, you really didn't have enough? Okay, you came to the right place to end the day with a splash. So today we're going to talk about science operations and FireSmart policy making, how to bridge gaps. And I have a great panel with me, a couple of presenters, and I'll go through the presentations one after the other. It's going to be, as we are closing, hopefully we can have an open conversation, open discussion. We have friends that are coming from Portugal, from Australia, from Spain, and let's try to do what we do here in this conference, having really a fruitful conversation. So I'm going to start by a small and short introduction of the topic with a small presentation, I promise. When Tiago asked me about trying to moderate a session about science and operations and policymakers on knowledge gaps, I kind of feel privileged because we are, as a technologist, we're kind of in the middle. We'll see later, right? And I'll start by saying that always, when I look at our landscape and the challenge that we have to face, we have to be conscious that we are dealing with a very complex problem, really extremely complex. You look at the beautiful engineering pieces that the Romans left us here in Iberia, and we can see that the engineering and the water science is really an ancient science, right? That is still was proved, was developed, and is there, and it's proven that it's working. The forestry science that was developed by Koda in Germany more than 200 years ago is a mature science. We have friends, I'm a forester by myself, and I know people that can make curves of growth of the different species with really at the microorganism level, interactions and symbiosis at the different species level, because it's really a mature science and ton of research applied, because, well, that's one of the things that foresters are, we're applied people, that is validated and is used to manage forest landscapes worldwide, right? And we have another science that, although it was started by Aristotle in 2,000 years ago with his first treaty, meteorology that is part of the data that we need, the science that we need. It's a solid and a very relevant science. Actually, if we compare to human genetics analysis, probably a biggest part of the computing power that is done worldwide is done to run the best weather models and the climate change models. There's a ton of researchers, there's a ton of industry that applies the data of this relevant science, right? And where are we? Well, we are a very young science, extremely young science. It's a science that really started basically in the 50s, Canada, Australia, the US led the charge, based out of need, based on really the need to start to answer questions, some of them after crises or tragedies, like the Man Gulch fire that really started the Missoula Fire Lab. And even in terms of journal publications, Wildfire is the main journal published by Cicero from 30 years ago, but until now, that was the only journal that was there. Now we have Fire, we have some others, but really very little doors for the publication of the work of our scientist friends, right? Complexity because we have to deal with everything. We have to deal with the climatology, but also because we really need to look at the bigger scale, but we also have to go to the local scale, local weather conditions. We have to look at the complexity of the interaction between the fire and the weather, interaction with the terrain, with the fuels. It's not only vegetation, it's the fuels, how those forest lands are burning and how those houses are burning. And we have to do before, to understand the history, we have to do during operations, can in real time provide valuable information during operations. And we also have to look at the future of our changing environment. But this is not enough because we have the human factors. First, the safety of our fighters, not only directly for fire operations, but also smoke exposure, mental health issues. There are so many topics that we still need to know better. The impacts of wildfires on our society and how our society is able to digest and try to live with fire instead of, okay, I have a problem, someone will solve that problem for me. This is the evacuation of 2003 fires in San Diego, more than 500,000 people evacuated. That's now a common picture. And even the tragedy, right, that we have, and this was after Pedro Gao. And all these events, when I was at the last fire conference that was in 2011 in South Africa, well, after that, we just went from unprecedented to unprecedented to unprecedented. Portugal, Chile, Australia, twice. We thought that we had 2009, we had enough. Well, we had 2019. And then we had California, 17, 18, and then 20, worst fire season in the West, and 21. And we can keep talking and talking about our friends in Canada, what happened in the Rockies, or what happened in the Mediterranean recently. So there is a very, very complex scenario. I used to say that this business is more complex than war. We don't have the red button, right? So when I look at the gas based on my actual experience and having the privilege to work in that middle ground that is not in the fire line and neither is in the lab, we're in that very exciting environment of the technologies. And looking at some reference work, for example, I really enjoyed the work that the Canadians did with their blueprint on wildfire science. This is a work that I really recommend. If you haven't seen it, it's 2019, 2029. Actually, that work was done in 2018, which just after the ashes of the British Columbia fires. And they tried to synthesize which are the gaps. And I did my version of that, but I would say that we can summarize it in, on one side, basic science gaps, all the topics, fire-atmospheric interaction, long-term fire climate effects, microscale, effects on our ecosystems, basic really science topics, combustion, convection, different kind of models that up to now are trying to be developed to try to understand the basics of our science regarding fire behavior. Or operational gaps. I mean, still we have many operatives that are based and they take their decisions not taking into account the science. Many based on combinations sometimes of experience, testosterone, and okay, well, sometimes that's the only what is there. Reality is that it's not that bad. I mean, there are rooms to improve, but to be honest, for example, we see a ton of operational response, resources, etc., and we know very little, for example, about performance, or which are the best combination of resources in front of these kind of situations, really operational gaps, or better use of the intel during operations. We don't know about that yet. But I think probably one of the biggest one is the socioeconomic gaps, how we connect with our society, and how we can make them understand what is needed on this biggest and probably the most common natural hazard worldwide. How different cultures and different scenarios cannot apply the same recipe. It's not the same recipe everywhere, right? So we really need to know better what is the best models of local participation, how we can get the support of our policymakers for more efficient city planning or long-term planning, long-term policies, resiliency, developing resiliency models, etc. Right? For example, there are like big policy movements, like for example, things that are happening right now in Europe, that to be honest, I think that the wildfire community, we have to really have a word on the decisions that are being taken that are making probably more complex living on our rural landscapes and living and manage our forests because of the informed societies only from the urban mindset, right? Instead of, on a more balanced way of how to live in our environment. So we are fire people, so we love fire triangles. So here's a couple of triangles for you, okay? I think that try to solve these kind of gaps, we need to have the right people to start. And as I mentioned yesterday, that our scientists are incredible champions. I mean, the complexity of the model that they try to face, the amount of support that they have, Fantina, these kind of problems, the money that you guys get to solve those problems is absolutely ridiculous. And there's a ton of light pointed on this in our scientific community to solve a problem with very little resources. And sometimes that's science, because there are so very little resources, it's even hard to enforce, to make the proper international collaboration that has to be done. And still, there are some global experiments, but for this global problem, we need the scientists that try to answer those questions, but obviously we need the users community that apply that science, right? They are not driven with the same carrot. Our users community, they have to serve the public, to protect our lands, to protect our people. Science community needs to go to get the funds for the project, that now I have funds, now the funds go down, and I have to go. I couldn't support my students team or my postdoc teams, because what you have to produce is science, and that's what you're valued for. But on the other side, the users, they have a different time. So in the middle, I think that there's a role for the technology people to try to work together, to try to identify science that is applicable, and users that can tell where we have to go, and at the end of the day, make operational science. And that operational science, at the end of the day, I think it can be explained when I make it operational, when I make it science that can be applied. I also try to, I have my other triangle, which is the operational science, operational technology triangle. Basically, scientists try to build models to simplify all this complexity. That's what we do in science. All this complexity, make it in an affordable way, in a way that could be, delivered on time. So we build models. But those models have to be field tested. It cannot go directly from the lab. They have to be field tested. They have to be proven. They have to be accepted by the community. They have to be trusted. And they have to be trained, because our users really face terrible environments. And the science that we provide them, and the tools that we provide them, the models that we provide them, have to answer those questions first. Second, the models that we create, they have to be fed by data that is available. And I mentioned all the complexity. Yesterday we were talking about it's not big data that we need on the wildfire world. We need huge data. We need historical data sets of weather. We need all the imagery that you need, all the LiDAR data that you may have. That is huge data. And we need that data has to be available, has to be accessible, has to be integrated. We have to mix all that data, right? And finally, for the different type of stakeholders, I think that we need to provide results that provide them actionable information, whether it's the guys on the fire line, the policymakers, the planners, foresters and prevention, and the community people. All of them needs results for the different needs, and not all of them the same. All of that together, you mix a good balance, and every one of them will have a applied science product that will have to, that will be successful, right? So I think that there are a couple of ideas. I think that the challenges to fill and pass those gaps, I'll take some ideas here, and we'll listen the presentations and the panelists. Well, we need to transfer the applicable science in an operational way at the different stakeholders level. We need to communicate properly. We really need to be good at communication, because at the end of the day, everybody needs the support of different stakeholders, and at the end of the day, it's the public. Public that sometimes say, okay, thank you, heroes. Firefighters are heroes. You know what? We don't need heroes. They are underpaid, and at the end of the movie, we need people that understand, that lives in a fire environment, and when they have to be part of the solution, we need to communicate right. And then help to adopt the change, because when we have those models, we have those tools, we have everything, and then we go to an organization, how we help them to adopt the change? Because, change, that is something that, when you try to make it, it will be painful, it will kill you, and it will be horrible during the whole way process of adopting change. It's not. We really need champions to adopt change, right? And when we're done with the fire science, and end with this, we talk a little about this topic, which was, for me, was really, really incredible, is that when we're done with the fire science, then we have to talk with our social sciences people, because that's when their job starts. And just want to show the example that we mentioned a couple of times during this week. It's just what happened in Oregon, where probably the best scientists with the best data delivered a great risk assessment, 1 year after the worst fire season in Oregon. That's 2020 worst fire season, 2021, this is delivered. This year, the Oregon governor forbid to use this risk to do any kind of insurances, any kind of application of this risk, because people didn't like that they would have their insurance risk, insurance wages raised, right? So just saying, no, we don't want size, we don't need size. We just prefer to close our eyes and move ahead. So for that, we really need that kind of extra work. So with that, I'm gonna go right here, go back, and we're gonna continue our session. In this case, we're gonna have Sandra, she's gonna make the presentation, and we won't go through the intro. She's working on forest-wise projects. She's a researcher there. She'll make the first presentation for you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for being in this session. Yeah, it's good to have some people here. I know that it's late, and I will try to keep it short. I'm going to present briefly a research impact assessment that was developed under the scope of a research and development program for wildfires prevention and fighting, funded under the scope of a cooperation protocol developed by the Foundation for Science and Technology and Collab ForestWise. Okay. The research program was created following the catastrophic 2017 wildfires that affected Portugal. And the aim of this program was to fund applied research to problems related to wildfire prevention and fighting, but also relate with the safety of the communities. FCT promoted the structure with Collab ForestWise and also with support from other entities such as Arquivo, focus or aiming to assess and maximize the research impact of these projects. I'm going to present this methodological framework, which is focused on the pathway for impact, or on the several pathways to impact. And I will try to give some reflections on the implementation of this methodology to the projects funded in 2017 under the scope of this research and development program. Well, before presenting some reflections, I would like to set some challenges that we have to consider when we are performing a research impact assessment. The first challenge is the time needed to assess the benefits really generated by research is hard to predict and also depends on the maturity level of each project. The second aspect is the flow between input, activities, output, outcomes, and impact. This is not always easy to assess, it's complex, and with a lot of subjectivity. A third aspect is that there is no harmonized methodology for impact assessment. We have several methodologies, some more focused on indicators, quantitative indicators, others with participatory approach, and this is the ones we adopted. But there is this lack of harmonized methodology makes the process harder because we have to think about each project and what are their objectives, dynamics, backgrounds, and the complexity increase with the number of projects we want to analyze. There is also a need to make a cost-benefit analysis in terms of the public investment accountability, and this is a very important aspect. We need to know if the public investment was well made, but this needs medium and long-term assessment, usually ex-post assessment. And finally, we know that researchers don't have all the control. They control their project, the idea, they control the activities, but they don't control, for instance, the public agenda, which is not always aligned with the research interests and with the timings, for instance, for the private sector. Well, in terms of the research and development program for wildfires prevention and fighting, we have additional challenges because these projects, there was 56 projects funded under this research program, and they were funded in 3 different calls, 3 different years, with a public investment of around 50 million euros, and this leads to distinct development stage, and we decide to focus on the 2017 projects first, and then replicate this methodology for the 2018 projects and 2019. Another important aspect was that when we start this process, the projects were still ongoing, so we decide to focus on pathway to impact instead of measuring impact, because the projects were still being developed, and we thought that maybe the discussion around impact could be good for increment that impact. Also, the projects are located in several scientific areas with address distinct objectives and dynamics, as I already said. And finally, very important, and this research program was developed under the situation of the pandemic of the COVID. And this was introduced another layer of complexity because these projects have to deal with many constraints, as you all know, people dealing with I think it was in all sectors of life, so everyone feel it. And researchers have to adapt to these circumstances, and yeah, it was a little bit difficult for them. In terms of the methodological framework, I will just present briefly the framework and what are the main insights to our reflection, how we decide to do this. This was based in 4 main questions. The first one was, what is the aim of assessment? What do we want to assess? And the aim was to understand which benefits are being generated by research beyond scientific impact. And this information is quite important to promote the results and benefits of research and development programs, but also to reinforce the accountability of public investment and to analyze and inform future research strategies and also the allocation of funds. The object of analysis was the research program and the projects with a focus on results and benefits or impacts, considering several types of impact that I will address a little bit to the front. Also, the research impact assessment was developed in close collaboration with the researchers, especially the coordination teams of each project, but also with the stakeholders and partners, and potential end users of these results were involved in a later stage of the process. The methods used were based, as I already said, based on participatory interactions. So we did meetings, interactive meetings with researchers, with stakeholders. We tried to put them together in a focus group. But we also produced a table with indicators for ex-post assessment that we didn't perform because the projects were still ongoing, but that can be used in the future. Well, here, this image is only to show that we focus on pathways to impact, and for this we need to check or to try to understand the entire flow of research and discuss potential ways to increase the benefits of each project. What can we do to increase our benefits to the society, and also identify some needs and challenges that we need to address if we want to pursue more impact. We analyze this path together with the researchers, but we try to understand each project individually and differentiate between results, application of results, and then the benefits. And this is something that is hard to do Well, this is the methodological approach. It was based on a literature review and inspired by the work of Mark Reed and his team. We adapt this methodology to our context. We call it Path for Impact. And this methodology is developed in the 4 phases, including different interactions, as you can see on the right side of the picture. Yeah. No, I cannot do it. This methodology was also developed in a sense that we can replicate in the other editions of the Research and Development Program for Wildfires Prevention and Fighting, but also to other programs of research in several areas. This is the impact methodology that we used. The aim was to cover all potential benefits. So we have the first impact type, which is the advance in scientific knowledge, which is very obvious when we are talking about research projects, either applied or fundamental. But this was not the focus of our assessment, because this is already performed by FCT, and this was only to consider that this is a very important part, I think is the most important part of the projects. They have to contribute to, they have to advance in scientific terms. Then we also discussed the benefits in terms of public awareness and social capital. The environmental benefits were the focus of our assessment because these projects were defined to find solutions to wildfires prevention and fighting, but also to post-fire management and to help to increase safety of communities and operational teams. But also the contribution to other natural resources like air, water, soil. So we look into these benefits, and then the socioeconomic benefits focus either on the health and safety issues, but also considering, for instance, potential contributions of the projects in terms of economic valorization at rural contexts. Finally, we also address the potential contributions of the research projects to inform future policies, and this was a very important part of many of the projects. They have important contributions to be included in these policy documents. Well, very briefly, the projects of 2017 were divided in 6 clusters. These clusters were defined according to the type of results produced by each project and the area they are located. I will not spend many time explaining these clusters. I think the titles are quite clear. But just to say that we had 18 projects for the 19 funded, so we have almost all the projects on board on this assessment. And this work would not be possible without the collaboration and availability of the researchers, teams, and especially the coordination of projects, and I would like to thank them. I see that at least one coordinator of a project is here, but this was only possible because they really, really were keen to participate in this process. The methodology implementation, the discussions generated by the interactive production were clear in pointing out a very key message. Maximizing research impact needs to involve different layers of stakeholders. This does not mean that everyone needs to be involved in everything, but it means that at least all the researchers should address all these stakeholder groups and think, how can I target these groups? How can I involve them? So beyond the funding entities and the research teams, it is important to guarantee the involvement of the operational and technical level, especially if we are on the field of applied research, especially if you can, in an initial stage, for instance, during the proposal design. As already mentioned several times in this conference, policy and decision makers are a very important stakeholder. And we need to target them through specific communication. If not possible during the project development, we should do it after project is finished. Now, just a few reflections from our assessment in terms of needs and strategies to maximize research impact. So one of the key aspects was how can we further research and development. So these projects need further development, need to improve their models, need to scale up their results, need to validate at the operational context their results. So we need further research and development if we don't want to lose all the knowledge produced so far. And for that, the needs are to ensure research line stability, to increase result scale-up and increase technological readiness level, to adjust research to local context, to real context, to the operational needs, and also to maintain and optimize platforms and applications developed by the projects. In terms of strategies, we think that maybe it's important to diversify funding sources, also guarantee stable sources of funding for research lines. Another important strategy is to increase research co-design and engage stakeholders in the research process and intensify collaborative projects between research units, but also including public entities, private sectors, and technological partners. In terms of validation in operational context, it was clear that we need to identify and engage the right stakeholders. And also we need to increase confidence in results produced by research. If we engage them from an early stage, maybe the confidence will build up. But for that, we need to allocate also resources in the operational entities. So the resources need to have, the operational entities need to have the resources, and I'm talking about human resources, but also other types of resources, in the entities able to collaborate with academia. In terms of strategy, okay, I already said that we need to engage end users in the research process, promote the use of historical data, provide by the operational entities, and define specific funding sources to test and validate results in the operational context. In terms of dissemination and capacitation, it was another aspect that was very important in our discussion. And the needs is to increase public awareness on emergent thematics. And here I can point out soil protection, for instance, was one of the thematics that should be more relevant in both in science and in public agenda, but also the extreme wildfire events is something that we need also to increase the discussion on it. Another need is to ensure adequate resources for results dissemination beyond project funding. So this program, as 15% of the budget was dedicated to dissemination, but in some cases, projects are approaching the end and they still don't have enough confidence on the results to be widely disseminated. So we need to think on other sources of funding to continue dissemination actions after the project is finished. And also training, because many applications and platforms were developed were developed by the projects, and it's important to guarantee the suitable training to use these applications and if we want to promote the use of all these technological assets. In terms of strategy, one of the things that was mentioned was the importance of having a common platform to disseminate the research and development program. Instead of having all these websites of projects, which are important, we should also have a place where end users can go there and know what is important about a specific research program. Also to reinforce demonstration activities, one example, field days, but also participatory monitoring, test beds, living labs, more spaces for people go there and ask questions and see with their own eyes. And also to reinforce these demonstration activities to key stakeholders and opinion leaders, which can then pass the word and spread the word. And finally, engage with stakeholders and end users to develop further dissemination training events. This could somehow respond to the funds, or to give the funds to go further in dissemination after the project is finished, if we have these partnerships ready. Finally, and I'm going to my last slide, this one and another one. Finally, in terms of acceptance and adoption of the results, one of the needs that was pointed out is how to increase perception on the benefits of incorporating research results. So we need to communicate better why science is important for operational teams, for technical teams, how can they benefit from science. And also, we need to try to find ways to integrate the information and results in decision support systems already in place. Instead of always try to develop new systems, we should try to go to the existing systems and to find ways to put our knowledge into the systems that are already being used by a specific entity or several entities. In terms of strategies, well, here we have to plan and guarantee resource to ensure knowledge and technology transfer, and this was very often mentioned during the conference. We need to find these structures to transfer knowledge, transfer technology. We also need to harmonize better language, process, and methodology between academia, public and private sectors. We are still sometimes speaking different language, and increase data sharing and open access, which is not enough. Well, my last slide, future paths. Here, this lesson is mostly for applied research. We don't want to minimize the role of fundamental science, but in terms of applied science, we think we should have science with impact by enhancing the role of science towards societal benefits. For instance, we can always design an impact plan together with potential end users. If we want to solve a problem, we can approach end users and try to create a proposal to solve this problem together, and with an impact plan to be clear what will be the benefits by the end of the project. A second aspect for discussion will be the multi-stakeholder engagement. We always talk about this, but we still have a long way to go. So we need to customize and empathize with our research network. And customize because we cannot do always workshops or focus group or always the same thing. We need to customize. We need to know what is the right approach to the right stakeholder, and also empathize because, we all have different interests, and empathy is to put myself in the other's shoes. The third point is we need to perform research impact assessment. This methodology and this work we did with the researchers and end users was one of the first works of this kind in Portugal, and we think that we have a long way to go, but we would like to see this replicate or with other methodology, but we really need to perform this research impact assessment and to communicate better also the impact. Not only to assess, but also to communicate the results of this assessment. And finally, for the topic of the session, we need to close the gap. And for this, I think one important thing is to find these interface structures, or to find inside the structures already existent ways of enhancing knowledge and technology transfer, and bridge a gap between academia and society. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. We'll continue. Arlindo Santos, he's the head of knowledge and innovation at GIF.
Well, boa tarde a todos. Good afternoon, everyone. So I have a very short presentation, basically explaining and showing our experience during the last years at AGIF. As we spoke before, there are several R&D projects going on in Portugal. We have good researchers, we have good R&D results, but the implementation of real solutions that solve real issues within the system, they are still lacking. So together with ForestWise, we envisioned this strategy, a common strategy, which objective is to collect the real needs that are existing within the system with all operational entities, and to work these needs out and have projects that solve those problems. Our goal is basically to foster innovation, implementing an innovation management system, and basically having a system that generates solutions in a systemic way. This is our future goal. This is, I would say, still a strategy, and it's not easy to implement this strategy, and there are several barriers that make this difficult. And what I have here to show you is basically the barriers that we encountered, and what I would like to do is to pass these issues that we see to the panel and try to understand how you in Australia, in Spain, in the US, how do you overcome these barriers? Because, I think these issues are not exclusive to Portugal. I think these barriers apply to every country. So the first barrier that I have here is complexity. So wildfire management is, a real dynamic field, and it requires a broad range of expertise. So as we saw in the presentation before from Sandra, it's important to organize the knowledge in clusters, and we have here in this conference the landscape fire governance framework that can help us to separate the different areas of the management system, and this can help us find solutions for areas that typically are a bit forgotten, such as planning or communication. A big issue is always the resistance to change. And this is, I would say, normal because, people are comfortable with existing practices, and it's always easier to do what we always did. But even if we know that we could introduce novelties to our work, it's not always easy to do it. Many times we are having, as I said, a very complex problem, and sometimes the solutions are very complex too. So it could be also interesting to decompose the solution in various smaller projects and try to tackle the big problem step by step and try to implement several solutions over time to reach the end goal. Another issue is the criticality of operations, mainly in the suppression phase. So people are normally try to resist to implement novelties into suppression because, as I said, the operations are critical and technology cannot fail during that process. So technology and knowledge providers must deliver robust solutions, and they have to be aware of that. So they have to prove that the solution works, and they have to have the capacity to explain that to the end user. So the organizational culture of all entities has to evolve to a more dynamic and response-focused approach. That is true for the entities, the end users, but also for the knowledge producers and technology partners. Then the lack of awareness and communication, and Sandra also spoke about this in her presentation. So we have on one side the entities that are involved in the integrated wildfire management system. They may not be aware of the new knowledge and technologies that can improve their operation. So communication is very important here, and the dissemination of the research projects, they must be well communicated. And on the other hand, research development and innovation partners may not know the real operational needs. So we have, of course, good examples in the Portuguese reality, but well, that's not always the case, and we need to improve that. The lack of communication channels, limited research dissemination, or lack of training is also an issue, but also the lack of stimulus alignment to consume knowledge in the operational partners. One big thing that we always encountered is, in our experience, is the difficulty in admitting the existence of problems. So if we ask people, what are your main issues, what are your biggest pain points, it's sometimes easier to say what the problem of other entities are, but it's difficult to say what their real issues is. So if researchers don't know the real pain points, they can also, of course, not work on them. So we need to establish a common communication platform and figure out a way to make people comfortable in sharing their needs, their problems. Also in this context, well, a mixed top-down and bottom-up approach is critical. So we need operational entities. They must share their needs and priorities. I said that before. But they also have to allocate resources to projects. So it's not enough to say, my problem is this, and wait for researchers to solve the issue. No, they have to be directly involved, and they have to allocate resources to the project. Researchers should also plan projects together with the end users, and Sandra also spoke about that before. The third point, and this, well, this is the triangle that Joaquin showed us. Whenever justified, technological partners should also be involved. So we have, for example, some projects where researchers develop software and then bring these models to the operational entities is not easy because they may not have the human or technological resources to incorporate this. So a technological partner can be the bridge between science and operation. Then limited resources. So budget is always an issue. Some entities know their problems, but then there is a lack of budget. But of course, I think this is also a planning issue, an internal planning issue of the entities. So what I say here is public entities should set aside a part of their budget dedicated to innovation. And to start, they could focus on lower risk projects that bring, well, quick wins, and with that, basically prove to the decision makers that it is important to invest in innovation. And have, of course, a long-term budget goal in this, having, for example, 3% of the budget of these operational entities should go for innovation spending. Then, the limited capacity for implementation. Often the lack of personnel is a reality, this is of course a problem. But is that relation that helps. So that they cannot do all the work inside the organization. They should get help from outside. Then the last point is regarding the EU-funded projects that are very important, but they deliver results more in the medium term, long term. And what we would like to have is smaller projects, and we need funding for these smaller projects that are more agile and deliver short-term results. So I end my presentation, and these are the points that I would like to pass to the round table to discuss with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlino. Really, thanks to both presenters, really include great work on the project and really good synthesis on gaps and what needs to be done. So with us, we have Elena Hernandez Paredes from the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. It's a wonderful name for a ministry, right? She leads the wildfire, she's the manager of the wildfire service in the ministry. Elena, you come from our country. In the conference in Coimbra, we learned that Spain Elsa Pastor introduced that Spain has the biggest production in science articles in Europe. So there's a ton of activity, really. Where do you think we are? What do you think that in the last years has happened, what has achieved in terms of transferring science and making it operational in our world, and based on your experience in the service?
Yes, well, thank you, Joaquin. From my experience, what I see is that, for example, when I began at the ministry 13 years ago, we started to be invited to be members of advisory groups in research and development programs, but when already the topic, the methodology, and the project has been decided by the researchers that were in that program, no? So that was a beginning. We were invited to kick-off meetings, we were invited to advisory groups, but in the end, everything was decided already. But what I see now in all these years is that now we, end users, managers, are engaged from the very beginning of the development of the project. This, for example, within the European Commission is mandatory. If you want to apply for funding, you need to engage end users from the very beginning to develop the idea that you're going to present. And of course, you mentioned something very important, is that we need to allocate resources to the research program. So I've seen a change, I've seen a difference as a best practice, and I think we are in that moment when we are engaged different stakeholders in the research programs, and this is very useful, because if not, it's not possible to adapt a result in which you haven't been involved. Correct. So it's more difficult to, of course, there's always a resistance for changing or for implementing new things, but if you've been part of it from the beginning, it's much easier, and it makes more sense, because we need to align our needs.
Correct. That's a really great lesson. I think we've been involved in projects from the beginning, and actually there was a great change on the European Union allocation. That was always willing to fund, but sometimes this alignment didn't exist, and that changed right now. We have with us also, thank you, Elena, we have also with us Gary Morgan, who is the chair of the Government of Victoria Ministerial Advisory Committee on Wildfire Risk. From the other side of the globe, Gary, I'm based on your experience, you've seen a lot. What do you feel these years, and with everything that happened in the two huge crises that you have in Australia, what has been achieved? I mean, there's been the changes, the collaboration. What is your perception of what has been achieved in the last years?
Right. Well, perhaps I should just say, after university, I started off in fire research. I then went to operations, then went to management, then became chief fire officer, left that, became the CEO of a research organisation for Australia and New Zealand. In doing that, it was about, I really wanted to have this research organisation set up because we had a lack of researchers, we had a lack of knowledge, plenty of gaps, wanting to know more information. We set that up. In a way, we learned a lot that went wrong in setting it up, because it was set up from the fire agency's perspective, thinking they knew what was the issues. They didn't clearly, and over time we learnt that the more we involve all people, the better it's going to be. And the social science research of it was very crucial. But getting the social scientists involved early on and getting the communities involved early on and trying to work out what the narrative is you want to get to. So all the different projects, how do they combine to achieve where you want to go to? So the journey we've gone on through that was we learnt got a lot of information out, but it wasn't adding to the changing the outcome for where we were managing fires. So until you work out what do you want to change, and then you work out all the spokes about how a whole lot of projects can come towards it, and multidisciplinary, rather than just one discipline, they get more working together, that's when we've made the big changes. And so we break down those barriers by having people involved early on, ones that Lindo mentioned. Early involvement of people, running it through, as you said, Elena, you've got more chance of having it, and as you said, Sandra, with all those 6 projects, how they all come together, they're all into a spoke of, well, where's that narrative going and how's that going to change it and who you're taking along. And if we've involved everybody on the way, you've got a lot more people then going to be supportive of that change, because one of the, as Lindo said, people are resistant to change, and unless they're involved and have some ownership, the barriers come up very quickly. So that's, I'd have to say, rather than a specific outcome, it's actually that journey that's changed on the way through. And when we've had major fires, early involvement of researchers immediately after fires. Sarah McCaffrey, who's around here, she left a bag behind here, don't tell anybody, but she came across to Australia from America and did research straight after the Black Saturday fires with people, and a lot of people died. But we were able to go in with a whole lot of researchers immediately afterwards and then work out what happened. Why did people do the actions they did? And then provide that to the major inquiry. I think that's probably the biggest lesson we've learned, is about the early involvement of social science involved in it. Sorry, it's long-winded.
No, that was really great. Thank you, Gary. I'll also, if Sandra, you guys can give also your perspective. You've been working very intense times, very changing time in Portugal, actually, from 2017. You've been in the middle of that. Something you want to address on top of your very focused presentation, by the way, something you can add on this?
Yeah. Well, I am from social sciences, so I don't know. Yeah, but I think it's true what you said, because in this experience with the national projects, not all the teams have social scientists, and this make a difference in the basis for the start of the process. There were researchers that were, well, all the researchers are open. I will not say that they are not open, otherwise they will leave the process. But the way they understand the reason why we are doing this and having this conversation, discussion, were different in consortiums that already have this layer of social science and understand better what we need to do and why we need to establish all these conversations with different actors and even collaborate within projects, because this is a research program, and sometimes we saw projects very working individually, and they need to be together because it's a research program and there's a common goal. Yeah, and that's my point.
Thank you very much. What about you?
What I can add to that is that after 2017, there were, well, this systemic change that we are presenting also here at this conference. AGIF was created, but not only AGIF. We have ForestWise that was created after the 2017 fires, and the graph that I presented. Well, I would say that is the main purpose of ForestWise, is to bridge the gap between universities and technology partners with operations. And they have in their structure, their shareholders are main Portuguese universities, but also private companies such as the utilities. So I would say they are the right partner to start this change. But as I said, we are at the beginning in executing this strategy. In parallel, we had the National Science Foundation investing 15 million euros in R&D projects for this subject. Those projects that ForestWise analyzed in this presentation basically was the first part of this national investment in R&D for this field. So I think that's a big change, but we still have a lot of way to do, mainly in bringing those two worlds together. So R&D and operations.
Okay. On that regard, I have a curiosity. That commitment on R&D, I mean, R&D is a long way. I mean, when we talk about commitment, what does that commitment look like? We're talking about 4 years, we're talking about 10 years, we're talking about, we have one of the oldest universities in Europe, in Portugal, we know that. But about new structure, new funding, what means commitment in a practical way?
Commitment to this field?
To the development of the research and development activities on the wildland fire science from the Portugal countrywide side.
Well, in this case, the projects are, well, three-year projects. And they reach the end of the project, and many of them still need development. And to produce real outcomes for the system, it will take time. Science takes time, and we heard that also in other interventions during this conference. What we think is that this fundamental science is very important and should continue, but we need to diversify the portfolio of projects, having also short-term projects that deliver, results faster. And target specific problems, operational problems to the system.
Okay.
Can I add something on that?
Yeah.
For me, commitment in this context means that you fund, you perform, you do your activities, you do your research, and then the assessment you make and the reflections you take from your process will need to feed the new strategy. So if you always reflect on what you are doing in terms of your scientific field, also allows you to go further.
Okay.
And I think we really need to find these new ways of always assessing what we are doing and learn from that.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Well, that's commitment. Good. I have a question from the audience for our panelists from Australia and Spain experience. What are ambition solutions that are in the pipeline to speed up knowledge absorption by fire managers and bureaucrats? Hopefully, I don't know if the one who did the question is in the audience. Clear.
Well, one thing I could think of is that from my point of view, there's a different speed between the research community and the management communities, let's say. So it's sometimes it's difficult to synchronize and align ourselves in order to ensure that the knowledge is well transferred and that the gap is it's closed. So that's one of the reflections I would say, that sometimes we don't have the same speed, you know, at the bureaucracy, and as policy makers or managers from public administration, we have a speed, and then the research community within their projects, within their agenda, they have a different speed. Sometimes we are we're slower because of the bureaucracy, and we are not able to incorporate all the knowledge, all the results when they are provided to us. That's one thing. But on the other hand, if we're talking about operations, and if we're talking more about immediate from the administrations, we also need things faster if we're talking about operations, and sometimes, on the other hand, the speed is different. So I would raise that.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. What about you, Gary, from the Australian perspective?
Yeah, there are a number of ways how people can try it, and it all depends on who you're dealing with, is how you're going to speed it up. But if you say, Elena, that the United Nations expects an end-user leader, well, if the end-user leader is somebody, whether it's from the community or a fire agency or whatever, or industry, but if that end user is having regular dialogue with the research as the research is doing it, not controlling the research, so the research still remains independent research, but having that dialogue to say, well, I have a lack of data here, and if the end user is able to provide greater access through industry or whatever to get the information, they cover that side. The researcher can work faster. At the same time, because they're having that dialogue with the end user, as things come along, they bounce things off and say, well, if this happens and that, you know, what can we do? And before you know it, the end user's going out and selling to other end users about using it straight away. And then all of a sudden people want to get on, and we've found that the researchers say, just pull back a little bit, leave us alone. We want to finish the research, and yet they're in such a hurry to get the end result and start using it. And I think once you hear that, you know you're starting to win.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, we have a little time, but I think we still can, I can throw you a couple of questions regarding, okay, what is next? What do you feel could be, you know, gaps that should be on the first row of, on the first line to be filled? What could be strategies to fill those gaps that could be more successful to accelerate the change adoption that is needed, and we feel that is a critical barrier? And maybe Elena, you can take it to start.
I think the presentations we saw here, they were very comprehensive and very well focused with many things that already have been identified, and I cannot think of anything else to add. It's true that, for example, the impact assessment is very important. I mean, we have to make sure that the projects and the research that we are proposing and that we are funding have a real impact in the needs of the community. So I would choose that one. But of course, there were many in the presentations that were very interesting. Another thing that I'm not sure if it's possible for us to address is that sometimes it seems that a topic is being researched and researched and researched once and again, and it's like we are inventing the wheel. Sometimes it looks like, I think this is the expression, no? Like there's a topic that is being talked about and addressed in research projects once and again and again and again. And I think at some point we have to say, okay, this is what is useful. We'll stick to this and not keep researching in some areas.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
May I just add something there to what Elena said? We found where that was happening, because again, researchers have pet ideas and want to keep following it. The way of fixing that was to say you fund the researcher to document what research has been done on the topic of the area you want to do before they start on, and you pay the researcher to do that. So then you've got something as a suite of knowledge to be able to put out on the web or wherever for the agency straight away. But it then turns around and say, hey, it's a check to say, are we doing the same as what we've done before? So it's just one little way of perhaps getting over that.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple of questions. One of them is a big one. I like this one. Okay, here we go. The low impact of science in operations or policy design is about a lack of demand or a lack of supply?
Can you repeat the
Yeah,
beginning?
the low impact of science in operations or policy design is because there's no interest, there's a lack of demand, or there's a lack of, supply. There's a lack of good science that could be applied there. What do you guys feel? That's a good.
No, I think sometimes it's a lack of resources.
Okay.
Within because we're talking about low impact, you said.
The low impact, yeah. Why science is not being applied, not making the impact it could make.
I think sometimes it's a lack of resources to try to make sure that the products and the results are implemented and they need time to. So they need budget, time, and resources, people, and so I would say it's also a lack of resources.
You mean, like, for example, having a lack of, innovation departments in the organization, right? For example, it's more common in the private sector, right?
Or people that can manage that implementation. You need people, you need time to implement something.
Yeah. That's a very good point, actually. Yeah, I think that science first, then the technology, then the tools, and the implementation, and the change and adoption is huge. Yeah, yeah. It's been highlighted today in very several points. Yeah. Okay. Anyone wanna mention or add to this question? I have a last one, and I have 1 second. Yeah, that's gonna be.
You've just been shown.
So, what are the unknowns, and what are the things that we know that doesn't make sense to sponsor? So there are unknowns on one side. On the other side, all right, this is useless, right? So it's also a hard question. We know that we live in a time there's a ton of money coming from different places for the wildfire world, and many well-intended, maybe not very good informed scientists, to be honest, I've seen a lot, of projects that, all right, it doesn't make too much sense, but that's a great question too, okay. Elena?
Not easy to reply.
Okay. Gary?
No, I don't want to answer that one.
I just say that I'm living in California, and you can imagine, really ridiculous amount of money that is coming to this world. And just shake sensors, artificial intelligence, and big data, and then you have a proposal, you have $5 million on top of that. That is going to solve all our problems. So that's something that is happening. I don't know that it needs to be funded. And on the other side, I'm also concerned about that really, we have to make an impact, but we need basic science, right? And we need institutions that also with the short-term projects, we really need institutions that can have the time and the long-term vision to keep doing, like, for example, the Missoula Fire Lab and other institutions worldwide that can address hard questions that can be addressed with little money or with little time. Right?
Yeah, that's why I also think that it's not just about single projects, but having agreements with research centers, for that long-term
I agree.
Yeah.
implementation, yes.
Well, if I may add, we are always saying that we need resources to produce knowledge and then to apply this knowledge into operations. But as we hear during this conference, there is a lot of ancient knowledge that we should recover, and This is mature knowledge that we could immediately apply.
Absolutely.
So this could be a cheap way to implement things, and it's also
Yeah.
innovation.
Yeah, sharing, putting in, yeah, enhance everybody. I think that this conference, I mean, when we look at the framework, the research governance framework that is putting in place, at the end of the day, we are really a small community, really small. We know each other. We just go to 3 conferences, you know everybody. It's amazing. I think that that is a strength. And I think that on this topic, I think as a global community, and maybe part of this initiative, obviously in IWF, we have that mission to share the science and share knowledge. I really like what our friends in Canada did with their blueprint of the needs on science. I think that it wouldn't be too hard to put together an international effort to at least set out some, as a community, what we feel that are really relevant gaps and relevant needs, and then just learn from each other the short-term achievements and small projects that could be shared easily in a way like, for example, you guys proposed. But I think that it couldn't be very hard job to do. Maybe Fantina is taking some notes that you can take the lead on this, Fantina. All right. Well, I'll say that I'm going to respect everybody's time. It's been an exhausting day. I had the boys yesterday. I won't have, nobody can speak to me tomorrow because I lost everything, because that's what it is. It's about, sharing the passion that we'll have and sharing these good discussions. So I would like to thank everybody that participated, and thanks to our brave audience for being here today, and see you tomorrow. Enjoy the conference. Thanks.
Thank you.